AI is all about the data it's being fed, but if it is feasting off of relatively recent data, it's going to be able to pick up on trends and things that 1,000 humans wouldn't be able to pick up on.
Stand by, I'll be right there.
Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 374. Today is Sunday, the 24th of March, 2020. My name is Minter Dial, and I'm your host for this podcast. This week also happens to be when the podcast festival goes live, May 28th, where we've got a fabulous lineup of podcast superstars like Kara Swisher and a brilliant opening act with Tom Morley. You can still grab your tickets at podcastfestival.live. This week's interview is with Vince Jeffs. Vince is Senior Director of Product Strategy, Marketing AI and Decisioning at Pegasystems, which is holding its Inspire online event on June the 2nd, and I highly recommend you attend. Vince is also currently the number 6 ranked overall author on CustomerThink.com and the number 2 on Customer Analytics. In this conversation, Vince and I discuss how AI has been applied during the pandemic, how to use AI responsibly, for example in developing the best customer experience, Pega's ethical bias check to help guide AI implementation, and a number of interesting other topics, all around AI, ethics, and empathy. Vince Jeffs, pleasure to have you on the show. You are based outside of Atlanta, as I understand it, and you work at a company I've become more and more familiar with that is Pegasystems, that works in helping companies improve their marketing, their relationships, using a lot of artificial intelligence. And the thing that really drew me into Pegasystems from the beginning was the fact that you had a significant emphasis on empathy. So I'm delighted to have you on the show. You're the third person from Pega that I've had a chance to have on the show, including the CEO, Alan Trefler, and Rob in Holland. In your own words, how do you describe what you do, who you are, Vince?
Thanks for having me, Mentor. And I guess I could say third's a charm. That might be a little presumptuous. We'll see, right? My name's Vince Jeffs. And again, pleasure to be talking with you. I'm a senior director at Pega for product strategy for our AI and decisioning area. So what that really means is I kind of help think about what we should be doing with the product in terms of building out new features in a roadmap for what we do in AI, and then also thinking about things like, partnerships that we should have to make sure that the solution that we're bringing to our clients is sort of full for their getting value out of it.
So in your LinkedIn profile, you talk about having a strong passion for what you do. I'm wondering how that passion has morphed or evolved in this pandemic period that we've had.
Yeah, I think when I think about why I got into this space, it was because that I feel like if you can help bridge gaps or build bridges, that's helpful to just humankind in general. So if I can build a bridge between the technology folks and the business folks, for instance, and I can do that either through communication, through having a different way of expressing concepts, helping translate requirements into technical things, then you're having an impact. And that's why I got into it. I have a marketing background. I think you have a marketing background too, but I've always been like super interested in technology. And I got interested a long time ago. So when I sort of fast forward all that, we don't want to talk too much about my long past, but when I fast forward all that to what we just encountered, personally, I thought, wow, what are we going through here? It feels very similar to a few events I've gone through. I mean, in my lifetime, I definitely lived through a number of market crashes and, certainly 9/11 and other things like this. but it felt very different. It felt like the cliff was dramatic. Like we fell off it dramatically, and society just changed like overnight, which I
Mm.
had never experienced. And I think that what's different here with the technology and the marketing, if you will, and the customer engagement, is brands suddenly found themselves like having to be more agile than they ever imagined they'd have to be, having to completely change their businesses in some cases. Like, I'm not making autos anymore, I'm going to make ventilators,
Mm.
and that's just one example. So I feel like my passion was, wow, the things that we've been doing to bring this agility and this ability to not be completely reliant on IT to take 6 months to do something is extremely important now. And
Mm.
so our message sort of is, that's, that got this whole area put on steroids overnight.
It's amazing the types of challenges that I would come across in terms of the dysfunction between marketing and IT and the lack of communication and understanding one of the other. Oh, you don't know what I'm doing in business, I'm a marketer. Well, don't ask me to do an IT project overnight. I got to debug it, I got to code it. It takes time for this stuff. And then when it costs money, oh gosh. And so there's so many little conflicts that we've had. And what we've seen in this, so this agility, this interesting, there seems to be a lot of technologies that I didn't expect come up, and some that I kind of thought would show up that didn't. Drones. It's fascinating, the opportunities for drones to participate, to be that socially distanced technology. How about AI? How has AI played a role? I mean, I can only imagine, because obviously I've been tracking it, but it seems very abstract for me to understand how AI could have played a role in this pandemic.
Yeah, I guess my answer to that would be like, how are we going to define AI? That always becomes the question. So let me take a stab at
Go
least the
for it.
way that
Yeah,
that
sure.
I've sort of viewed it as I've been involved with this sort of area in this application of it, which is in, marketing technology, customer engagement, CRM, which it sounds like you've been in also.
Sure.
Um, I would say that the ability to find insights and predict things is extremely important now, because if you can detect something that is changing and then help automate the new solution to that change that needs to be, that's probably a problem that's existing now that didn't exist a week or a month ago, then that's going to be helpful to the people that need the outcomes, that need more bandwidth, for instance, because they're working out of the home, or need healthcare that needs protective equipment, or an insurance company that needs to tell people that you know you need coverage to go out and deliver food or something. um, and so I think that the ability for AI to pick up on this and help with these various situations is it's working in concert with humans. That's what I've always. Some people look at AI as like the way Hollywood is like, oh, it's this artificial thing that's going to come and just like squash us, right? And it's machines taking over. But I've always looked at it as it's the symbiotic relationship between man and tool, right? And it's just another tool. It's a very cool tool in many cases, but it helps us do the things that we need to do for each other. So that's, I think it's very helpful in a pandemic.
So one of the things that I've observed is that we don't have any historical basis for what we're doing. You just said it. It's the first time. So we
Mhm.
can't go back and use some benchmark. This is so typical in business. So this agility and the ability to have real-time information makes us much more credible, because the story you want to tell or the message you might be saying today is completely irrelevant next week. Where we are in the lockdown, where we are in the number of deaths in your city, different from my city. So I can see how being real time, segmented, agile is useful. Yet I always hear with AI, you always need to have data sets.
Mm.
So how on earth do you manage to find the data to learn to create to create the AI that allows you to make the messages that are relevant to Atlanta versus London?
Right. Well, I mean, I think a lot of the data is still streaming into us, right? That was before the pandemic hit. And I think the part of the problem that organizations have is that they haven't been able to generally keep up with the amount of data that's being stored in their clouds or in their data centers anyways. So a lot of the data is there, on location of people and preferences and buying behavior and how they respond to advertisements on their websites. The question is, are they putting the right things on their websites now? Are they actually putting relevant messages up there that even matter now versus 2 months ago? Um, are they are they listening to the latest behaviors, which really matter the most right now, right? I mean, I might have behaved in a very different way 6 months ago, and that could be almost irrelevant now to what my needs are. So being able to pick up on my latest intent is like becomes the most critical.
Yeah,
So I think
because
that,
at some point you imagine you're playing through, oh, this is just a stupid little virus, and all of a sudden your father gets sick. then talk about how context changes the way you're going to view things. Not, or your business goes out of business, and then this stupid pandemic thing brings up for me, Vince, this notion of how do you be responsible with this? Because you might have access to data that makes you get an extra dollar, saves your business, but is it responsible in the way? So how on earth do you construct an ethical framework for your AI in something we've never done before?
yeah, I think that it really that's a question that demands that humans take responsibility for what their tools are doing. So this idea, and hey, we know it, right? You can put the machine into action and kind of walk away, right? And let it make decisions. And we've seen that happen. We saw that happen with Microsoft and Tay, right?
Right.
Where honestly, they kind of walked away and said, let this thing have some chats for a while, and it'll be cool. Well, two things there. They didn't like it. So having some responsibility over testing it beforehand or rolling it out in a controlled fashion is one set of responsibility. The second is like to be monitoring it, for humans to be like, at the switch, right? And to be ready to dial back or take it offline or dial it up, if it's making great decisions and it needs to be making more to more people because that's empathetic, because that's where the need is and it's picking up on that. So I think AI is, as you say, it's all about the data it's being fed. But if it is feasting off of relatively recent data, it's going to be able to pick up on trends and things that 1,000 humans wouldn't be able to pick up on.
Right. Because we have our filters, we have our biases. I mean, of course, AI does as well. What would be interesting for me, Vince, is to think about how you inform the individuals, these human beings that are participating with the AI, because you need to give them some instructions. So, let's say person A, B, and C. All right, when this happens, I need you to go down that route. When this happens, I need you to dial it up. When this happens, I need you to dial it down. And I have to imagine, because I'm not expert enough, but I have to imagine it's a complex roadmap to provide to human beings who sometimes interpret things according to their biases anyway.
Yeah, a great point. I think that you've got to bake in some controls. So you have to bake in, first of all, you have to bake in some policies, if you will. And what I mean by that is, and hopefully those are good policies, right? Because we've seen like organizations can have cultures that don't end up in, really ethical frameworks, and others can have more ethical frameworks. So some of that is going to be dependent on the leadership and the moral fiber of that organization. But let's assume that the intentions are good generally. So if they are, then I think you have to almost like a guidebook, you have to have some of that baked in so that the machine is actually following some of those principles. Um, and those are some of the black and white decisions. Should I be sending something to somebody under 18 or not? I mean, some of this is just based on legality, right?
Of course.
Um, but then there's the grayer decisions, like, I could extend this person a loan, but you know what, I actually have information that kind of tells me that they're likely to end up in collections in another like 6 months. Well, that becomes like a more ethical decision that you're
Big
making
time.
ahead of time, right? And you can program, you can have a suitability rule, if you will, that says that, you know the way we feel about this type of treatment right now is that it should not go to these people, even though they're eligible for it.
I have personal experience
Mm.
in conversations that were along the lines of, well, if we don't sell it to them, they'll buy it from somebody else. Even if buying it from me or them means they'll go out of business within 6 months. And the sort of the way so many companies, and certainly the one that I worked for, was, well, inshallah, at least they bought it from me. And what is it? How do you? I mean, maybe is it really a question of leadership principles, that you decide the way how you make the business is more important than just making the business?
Yeah, and I think some of that gets into the whether you're in it for the long run or whether you're in it for the short term profits, if you will.
Mm.
So if you're really in it for the long haul, then you may make some slightly different decisions. You may say that, you know what, it's not in the best interest for this customer to do this. And I do know that my competitor will do it, but I also know that it's not in the best interest of this customer. And so that there is a good chance that that decision will bear fruit, either with that customer coming back to you at some point and saying, you know what, I was wrong, I should have bought it from you. Or somebody else finding out about it and it kind of going a little viral, and then again your reputation being upheld, and in the long run, you doing more business because you were on the up and up.
In my last book, I talked about how actually the person to whom I'm speaking the most is my employee. Because if I tell my employee, screw this customer, you're making that employee look fairly shitty in front of the mirror the following morning, or as they prepare for work. And I think that is the sort of the way to have engaged employees. And if you can imagine treating your employees the way you want them to treat your customers, the chances are they might also code the AI to be the right way as well. So it's a whole sort of ecosystem in order to get that ethical structure and the empathy down the pipe. Because if you want to have an empathic AI decision-making process, but you treat your employees like dog do, then how on earth do you end up with a responsible or an empathic AI?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I turn around the statement of death by a thousand cuts into success by doing 1,000 little things right.
Mm.
And I think my experience in the jobs I've been lucky enough to do over my career with some really great companies. I mean, if I wasn't working in what I felt like was a great company that woke up every day and thought, I'm proud to work for this company, I wouldn't stay with that company,
Mm.
right? I'd go find, there's plenty of other companies and plenty of other jobs and too little time in life. So I feel like the companies that I've worked for in the past, including Pega, I worked for a company called Unica. I worked for SAS, who I have a lot of respect for. The analytics company does a lot of really great things and has a great culture. I worked for UPS. So you talked about drones, and that got my,
UBS
Spidey,
signal.
my UPS Spidey senses going. Was a great company. I mean, it just did 1,000 little things right, and usually on behalf of its employees and its customers. So both, like, totally agree. Like, you're not going to have a customer centric approach if your employees don't love working for you and want to get up every day and deliver a great experience in the interactions they have.
So Vince, if you're talking to a customer, so you and I have drunk the Kool-Aid, but your customer is like, I just need to make this really efficient. Really, make my AI good, make my CRM perfect. I want maximum clicks, maximum opens, maximum, you know, e-commerce dollar value, whatever. Wait. The thing that's important is treat your employees well. I'm wondering, you work in this whole domain of creating AI that's empathic. Where does that sit in the conversation, and how do you have flags, ethical checks that work at the employee level before they get to the programming?
Yeah, I think that there are ways to simulate ahead of time how good or bad your set of communications are going to be with your customers. Now, let's face it, some of it has to do with, like, how good your products and services really are in terms
Right.
of whether they're a good fit or not.
Yeah. If your
I
brand
mean,
sucks in the first place and your products are shit, then where are you going? What are you
yeah,
trying to do?
yeah, your only hope is sort of nefarious marketing, honestly.
Stem the tide. Yeah.
Right. But I will say that, that I think that the way to probably um, make sure that in the end, if you've got a good mix of at least some decent products that are going to fit for some people, um, that if you're going to be empathetic, then what you're really going to do is you're going to figure out a way until you can create more products and services. You maybe find white space and you send that back into engineering, right? And it comes back later with some new products that fit these areas that we want to strategically go after. But that taking a while.
Right.
Setting that aside, you want to find the people that are going to be best suited for what you got. And and one size is not going to fit all. So your job then is to stop trying to push things to people that they don't need.
They're going to be
Like,
disappointed with, or
they'll be disappointed with, they're irrelevant. They'll see as noise and annoyance. They'll get pissed off and they'll just, like, trash you as a brand. So that should be your job. And that, to me, is like empathetic marketing. It's actually saying, I'm going to listen to you and to what your preferences are. And you know what? If it's not a great fit, I'm not going to market to you. If there's not enough of a market for my products and services of people that really need it, I've got a problem. I've got a bigger business problem. But, if I have some decent fit, then my job is to find those people that it really does fit well with.
the word that I picked up on, I loved, is decent. I'm thinking that decency and one word really sums up empathetic marketing, and the word is no. The ability to say no, this is not right for you. Oh, wow. They're not going to make me waste my money on that. I want to come back to them, and when they hear them say yes. You have a white paper that Pega is coming up with shortly. In it, you talk about the ability to have an ethical bias check.
Mm.
This is a really interesting concept for me. I mean, it's already one thing in the black box of AI to understand what on earth and how the decision making is happening. But can you elaborate on what this actually means, an ethical bias check, and how you plan to put that into place?
Yeah, it's really exciting capability for us, because we think it gets into this topic that we've been talking about, of being accountable to what you're about to do, and having some, like, you know, framework for that ahead of time, having some, doing your homework a little, honestly. And that homework is running this through some kind of a game, if you will, a simulation that says, this is what I want to do. I know I've got these customers. I've already done some things with them, so I can pull them in and kind of simulate this and say, all right, what we're about to treat them with on our website, and when they open up their mobile app, if they call into us and they go into an IVR and they eventually get to an agent, what we told our agent to talk with them about, here's those things. And you know what? We can look at the distribution of those things. We can look at how many people of what kind are going to get these treatments. And then we can say to ourselves, is that fair? Is that ethical?
So is
Am
that
I
fair? Is that fair in their eyes? Is that what you're trying to replicate?
theirs in societies,
I
right?
see.
I mean, I think it's both, but I think theirs, yes. I mean, would it be fair to me if I was of a certain persuasion or color or whatever, and I didn't get a loan offer just because of that, not because of my ability to repay it or anything else, but just because I was male or female or of certain ethnicity? Most of us would say, no, that's not fair. Um, but this ethical bias check will tell you whether you're skewed and whether that's what's about to happen, most likely. And then it gives you a chance to change the strategy, change the way that you're marketing that, so maybe it is a little bit more, evenly distributed or fair.
Well, how on earth do you end up having an ethical framework, an ethical bias check, when you kind of need that as a people up front? Because in the end of the day, what so often seems to happen is that you and I, white males, we come with a certain set of biases that are programmed into us. And you and I can relate, yeah, we've got this and that and connection. And, some black person it doesn't connect so well because they have a different experience and this and that. So how do you end up even writing an ethical bias check that works?
Well, I think all you can do is you can highlight the potential problem ahead of time. To get somebody to actually take action on that, readout, if you will, is a whole different story.
Right. And
Uh,
you have to have that relationship with the client because that's what they want. And they come with, God forbid, their own clients, biases. And so you have to kind of confront that when you're in the client relationship and, and make them aware. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to be pragmatic. Business is business. But at the same time, you want that sort of pre-work to be done. I mean, you called it being accountable and responsible, which one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed looking at Pega, because there's so easy shortcuts at working at, and getting it better, making the better headline, selling more shit. But if you're doing that hard work up front, it may not get you all the customers right away because you have to say no to some people. But ultimately, I think not only does, from this feeling I get from your employees, the people I've interacted with, you feel a little more pride in what you're doing. You also have a certain dominion over what you're doing, and you're trying to do something for the better. And yet you have to deal with the clients, and they pay the piper, and that's the way it is. So what kind of confrontations you have as you layer in these pre-work to get to the right ethical balance at the end.
Yeah, I mean, there are some of these, this friction, if you
Tricky.
will, that,
Yeah, sure.
yeah, it's tricky. And I think the approach that we try to take is we try to take an approach of, again, a long view. Like, don't do that, because in the long run, it's got risks, right? Now, we can't prevent them. We're gonna, we are a software vendor, and we're gonna give them some tools, and we're gonna bring in some best practices, and we're gonna give our opinion, quite frankly, and we love to do that, and we like to believe it's a pretty decently informed opinion. And we're also open to, like, we're not always right, so we absolutely want to listen to the other sort of counter arguments. But if we're pretty sure we're right because we've seen this movie before, um, then we're going to be pretty adamant about that. But in the end, it might be one of these things where we're not going to say we told you so, but they'll come back and we'll say, well, yeah, you did it that way, but let's do it a different way next time.
It's funny, when you're working with customers, they live in their world. What perspective you can bring to them is also the fact that you've worked with other customers. And that type of additional perspective can be awfully useful for them. Like you said, you've seen that movie too, not necessarily in their industry, but that kind of perspective can also be very helpful. Maybe what would be useful just to finish, Vince, with one last area, which is to talk about maybe an example of a customer you've worked with, to give us a concrete example of how you've helped them through this sort of pandemic with an empathic AI I'd love to hear one story like that.
Yeah, I think one of our greatest stories is a bank in Australia, Commonwealth Bank of Australia. It's a big bank in Australia. If you're in the US, you may not have heard of it, but they're one of the top 3 banks, I think, in Australia.
For sure.
They really did take this sort of approach of, like a personal approach. I want to have the best possible conversation with my customer, in this moment. Like every time I interact with a customer, it's sort of an honor, to be able to interact with them. So I want to do right. I want to, be presenting something that is insightful, useful, and will help them, quite frankly. And what they find is that having that approach, that next best conversation approach, has worked very well. And it even worked before the pandemic. Of course, there were crises like wildfires in Australia.
Sure.
And they were able to.
That was the big news before the pandemic, but then all of a sudden it died out, right?
Right. There's probably still fires going, but this one's bigger.
Who knows?
Right. But the point is that in any crisis situation, and we comes back to our sort of where we started with agility and the ability to talk to customers about what matters at that time. They were able to respond very quick to the right kind of non-tone deaf messaging that they wanted to have out there for COVID. Because they were able to very quickly load in these COVID messages, which were all about, hey, we're here to help, but they weren't one size fits all. They were targeted to the individual and what they already knew about that individual, whether that individual was likely to need advice on cash or advice on financial management or, knowledge about things that they, services that were available to them, maybe even outside the bank. And so they loaded all those up in kind of record time and were very quickly, every time these customers, and they've got millions of them, were coming on their website or talking with their agents, they were having a relevant conversation with them, or more relevant than, again, a lot of brands would have, because they were unable to react that quickly.
I can only think that you, like I, have received God knows how many shitty, boring emails from CEO of this, CEO of that, usually about 3 weeks late, saying exactly the same thing, as if I give a shit. And if I'd rather say nothing, if that's all I'm capable of doing late, irrelevant stuff. And so I can just imagine how, especially since these so many businesses, people, unemployment, the financial challenges, if you can be sensitive, because if I'm in a sector that's thriving, let's say I manufacture PPE equipment, well, I'm hallelujah time. But if I'm not, and I'm going out of business and my employees are going to have to live on welfare or whatever, you need to really be sensitive to that. And then, so I'm guessing that you found a way to help the Commonwealth Bank to find the information, dissect it quickly. It's never going to be perfect, I'm sure. Last question. How on earth does Commonwealth Bank have that as an attitude?
It's unusual for, when you think, most people think of big banks, they think of like the quintessential company that doesn't get it, right? Or just wants to suck fees from me.
Absolutely.
But they have a different culture, and I think it's working for them. They really did adopt this culture of, we want to be relevant for our customers, and if that means like that, we're not going to say anything, because we've got a credit card we could push them because they don't have one, but they're going to try to figure out like if that is really a relevant thing to do. Like, would that person actually need more credit right now? Would that be useful in their life to where they are? So having that kind of approach, and like you said, it's not perfect,
No.
but they are, I think, being more relevant than a lot of big banks are. And so that's good. And I think we can learn from. It's hard for a big organization to be sensitive to each individual that's doing business with them. It's hard. Um, but hey, they've got to aspire to do a better job, because as you said, there's lots of brands that just suck at it.
Mhm.
It's so bad. And we always had this saying back early in my sort of technology career, back when I was a programmer. It was like, I really cared about whether somebody that I was working with got it or not. We always use that term, like, hey, he or she gets it, or he or she doesn't. And I kind of like have that same attitude when I go on a website or I interact with a brand. It's like, I pretty quickly, form a judgment. And it's usually pretty common sense. It's like, either this brand gets it, or they don't. And if they don't, then they better figure out what to do pretty quickly, because I'm going to bail, but then the next person will bail, and the next person will bail. So that's like really important lesson for big companies. They need to figure out a way to be more relevant to each individual.
The last thought I have is Pega's dealing with lots of competitors all the same, and you have to have great talent, and a lot of them are programmers. And yet, and I will say this, as an outsider, programmers aren't known for being empathic.
Mm.
But I get the feeling that you guys have kind of an inroad in creating, even amongst programmers and the techies, a more empathic culture. Would you say that's I mean, you're within, so what are you going to say? But I do get the feeling from the individuals that I've had a chance to talk to that it is something part of your culture as well, even amongst programmers, the least empathic type of profile often you might find.
Yeah, I think that goes back to one of Pega's, just, and this might sound a little trite, but it's really true. Pega really cares about its own people. And that's all the way down to whatever level you are in the company doing whatever job. I mean, we really do like embrace people and their roles in the company. And we have a good culture where we care about people. And we know that, everybody is not going to be perfect. But we try to strive to communicate. We have to communicate across time zones and language barriers and all those kinds of things. But if you treat people with respect, and you listen to them, and then your goal in life is to just do a better job, and you're really showing that you're trying to help that person ultimately do a better job, then that kind of has a snowball effect. It catches on. And I think that that's the feeling that generally there is in Pega. It's like we all are really trying to help each other. And there's times, hey, don't get me wrong. There's politics, and it's a
Sure.
company of
You guys are,
5,000 people.
that's right, big ass company.
We're a good sized company, and
And
we've got
often,
our warts.
yeah, of course you do. And
Yeah.
I mean, the notion of scale is so hard. But anyway, I congratulate you guys and Vince. I'm looking forward to the event on the 2nd of June. Of
2nd of
course.
June, Pega World,
That's it.
virtual
Inspire, of
edition.
course. I frankly, I would prefer it if we were in real, but this is the times. We will enjoy. We will inspire. How can someone track you down and follow you, and or connect and find out about the new white paper? What's the best way?
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. Really interesting conversation. You can, if you want to learn more about Pega, just go to pega.com. If you want to listen into us for Pega Inspire virtual event, it's June 2nd at 9 a.m. Eastern, and just go to pega.com and sign up. It'll be easy to do. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, the Jeffs. Also, I blog on a site called Customer Think, and I've written about over 30 articles on there on the same topic that we've talked about today, pretty much. So you can check some of that out and give me the feedback. Tell me whether you think my writing sucks or not. I want to get better.
Feedback is gold. Hey, Vince,
Yep.
thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, great to talk with you. Really, really a pleasure.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust is the reason, still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle to see. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason,